And we are live once again on Monday night at the Balcony Sports Lounge in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, on an ugly gray fall day. A lot of rain, a lot of gray clouds outside, but we're still trucking on. We just flew in from Cincinnati. Josh Katzenstein and myself. I guess I should introduce myself. I'm the host of the show, Jeff Duncan, alongside Josh Katzenstein. We both were in Cincinnati yesterday at Paul Brown Stadium for the Saints' 51-14 win against the Cincinnati Bengals. We'll talk a lot about that game on the podcast. Lots to come out of that game to talk about. But also, we'll review some of the college football action over the weekend. A lot to talk about there as well as we get down to the nitty-gritty as we head into the college football playoff finals. Where that's going to stand with the final four teams, we'll discuss that big picture. And then we'll also get into a little bit of forecasting for the weekend ahead. Saints are going to be entertaining the Philadelphia Eagles this weekend at the Superdome. The defending Super Bowl champions will be limping into town at 4-5. We'll talk about that matchup a little bit, spin it ahead. But first, we want to review the game yesterday. But before I get into that, I want to invite everybody, as always, here at the Balcony Sports Lounge. You got a question about my fashion, anything you want to throw out there, bring it on. I'm more than willing to answer those questions. Just submit it if you can to Michelle or Jennifer, or just bring it up here to the table. I'll answer it as best I can. Same thing to you out there on the Facebook live stream. Love to get your questions. If you got one for Josh about his fashion, which is much more questionable than my fashion, feel free to ask that as well. And Josh, let me get your thoughts real quick before we promo what's going to be going on here at the Balcony Sports Lounge next week. Your thoughts about the game yesterday. You and I spent dinner last night talking a lot about it among ourselves, but for public broadcast, what did you think of the Saints? I thought it was probably their most complete game of the year.
Well, I have a question. How dare you?
Just trying to be honest. You know, in journalism, we have to be honest, and I just have to be honest. You're a little underdressed for the occasion tonight.
I just came from the airport. You know, it's nice to be comfortable on the plane, but that's not even what I'm talking about. I expected some music playing when the show started. I was thinking we would hear Beyonce ring the alarm.
Oh, that's true. That will be a big subject of discussion. Are we calling it Alarmgate or are we calling it?
I think Smashgate. I'm going with Smashgate. Yeah.
That, of course, is the fire alarm that Sean Payton destroyed. I think he took exception to the word destroyed today on the conference call. If you aren't aware of that story, guys, I don't know if you all heard about that, but Sean Payton took a helmet, or do we know what he destroyed the fire alarm with?
So someone told me a helmet, but that's not confirmed. I'm sure we'll get some more information on Wednesday when we go to talk to the players. I'm sure plenty of them will want to boast about their head coach, taking matters into his own hands. But as for the game, I mean, it was a total beatdown. Like, the Bengals were completely overmatched. I think you could argue that the Saints were better at every single position, except maybe punter, because we didn't get a chance to see Thomas Morstead punt. And I think he probably is better than the Bengals punter, who I can't name off the top of my head. But, I mean, they scored touchdowns on all 5 first half possessions. They scored on 9 of their 10 offensive possessions in the game. And I think it was just the last one where they were kneeling it out, right?
Yes, that's the only time they didn't score, when they weren't really trying to score.
So, I mean, they just dominated completely. The defense, found ways to stop them on third down. I mean, I was a little nervous for the Saints at the beginning because the Saints marched down, scored a touchdown, and then the Bengals answered it right away. And you always worry about this team because the defense is, susceptible to giving up big plays and long drives. But after that, they figured it out and, really locked things down. And I think we saw that, the Bengals offense was really no match, especially without A.J. Green.
Yeah, I think the Bengals defense looked as bad as that fire alarm after Sean Payton got through with it. Sean Payton did confirm today that he admitted he smashed the fire alarm, and he admitted he had offered to pay for it, which I guess is smart because it's actually a criminal charge against him if he destroys a fire alarm.
I saw a few different things from media places in Ohio about the severity of the crime. I know I saw a lot of chatter on Twitter. Everyone saying that back in elementary school they told you it was a felony to pull the fire alarm or whatever. But I mean, it's certainly understandable from his perspective. I mean, they're just trying to, have a quiet moment before the game to focus. It was about 2.5 hours before.
It's not understandable.
Okay.
He's not gonna stop the fire alarm by smashing it.
Okay.
That's like Flintstone mentality or something. That's not how you stop a fire alarm.
Right. Now, I'm saying it's understandable from his perspective for a few reasons. A, he was apparently talking all before the game about how worried he was for the Saints having this 1 o'clock kick because it was their earliest game in weeks, which is, the case.
Correct.
And then, it was a chance for him to sort of make a statement, to his team, rally them up. And he said it wasn't motivation. That had nothing to do with it. But, it's 2.5 hours before the game. Your guys are about to go out and start their, that's when the guys, just all get into the right mentality and all this stuff.
Got their beats on.
Exactly.
They're getting in the zone.
And it's hard to do that while that's going off. And I'm actually curious, too, is, when he smashed that, could they still hear the alarms that were going off outside? Because they were going off through the whole stadium.
Yeah.
So, a lot of unanswered questions, but
it worked. Something worked.
Look, they won, so maybe he's going to make a habit of it. Who knows?
Well, the Saints broke a lot of records in that game yesterday. There were a lot of things. That was tied for the fourth most points they've scored in franchise history. It was the second most points scored by an NFL team this season. The Steelers, just a few days before, against Carolina, scored 52. Scoring on the first 9 possessions, I believe, was a record. They put up 509 yards. They had 34, I think, first downs. They did whatever they wanted when they wanted against Cincinnati. That's not going to be. It's not going to be quite as easy this week. They caught the Bengals with a lot of injuries, and it seems to be a recurring theme here for the Saints. They're getting the Eagles this week with a bunch of injuries. Ronald Darby, their starting corner, their best corner, out for the season. It was announced today. They're banged up in the back end, and they just lost to Dallas and could not stop the run.
Right.
If they can't stop the run against Dallas, you know exactly what Sean Payton's going to do on Sunday at the Superdome.
Yeah. The only concern, I think, for the Saints, and Sean Payton talked about this today, is that Philly, after a loss like this, is going to come in here incredibly desperate. What are they, 4-5 now?
Correct.
So, they obviously know that they need this game, but I was actually listening to something earlier. It's great to be a desperate team, but you got to be desperate and healthy. You can't just come in here, nicked up without some of your best players, and the quarterback play for the Eagles has not been particularly good when Darby was on the field. So I think that's certainly a concern. And it's also something that the Saints have really benefited from this year. We talk about it all the time. They have not had any serious injuries to any of their top players. The only one that's a concern is Teron Armstead. But we don't know exactly, the severity of his injury. Sean Payton provided no update today on his conference call. We should find out a little bit more as the week progresses. But even still, Drew Brees talked after the game about how confident he was with Jermon Bushrod. He said something about, he's used to looking on that left side and seeing Jermon over there. So, that obviously would be a significant injury. But, all the other ones, I'd say, Ted Ginn, technically the number 2 receiver when he went down, but he's really like the 5th offensive weapon on this team. Patrick Robinson, that's tough, but that he's not one of your 3 or 4 best defensive players. So I think they've been really fortunate to avoid, the major injuries that a lot of teams. We talk like the Packers have lost Aaron Rodgers for like stretches of multiple years. Andrew Luck to the Colts. The Saints have been really fortunate.
Carson Wentz
last year. So this year, last year, the Saints have really benefited from that, and I'm sure they'll hope, to keep staying healthy while also getting teams that are dealing with big injuries.
Well, I think they're one of the healthiest teams in the league. They've had injuries, but not to key players, and right. I think Teron Armstead, as you mentioned, probably the first key player that they potentially could be losing for a significant period of time, but they've got some depth along the offensive line. This is a key stretch coming up for the Saints. They play at home, as we said, against Philadelphia, and then they turn around 4 days later, Thanksgiving night, and play their arch rival, the Atlanta Falcons. So they'll be playing 2 games in 4 days, both of them at home, so that helps. They'll have to travel around that short schedule. And I guess it's a good time to remind everybody, next week, Thanksgiving, a week from this Thursday, Thanksgiving, you can come here to 200 North Beach. The restaurant will be open. It's open from 11 to 5, and then where we're at, the Balcony Sports Lounge, upstairs from 200 North Beach. It'll be open starting at 6 p.m. for the Falcons Saints game. So you can come get Thanksgiving dinner. If you're an orphan like me, that's what I have to do. I have to go out because I can't cook a turkey by myself. Impossible. So I would go.
It's
this would be the perfect setup for me if I didn't have to cover the game. Could go eat here at 200 North Beach, then come up and watch the game here at the Balcony Sports Lounge. But I will be in the Superdome along with you watching that game. And I think the Saints have a great shot to win their 9th and 10th games in a row. I mean, you and I were talking about it last week. I'm not picking against this team until they show any sign of letdown. They're actually getting better, I think. I mean, I think they're starting to figure out their weaknesses and cover it up on the back end of their defense. What is this little snarky smile you're giving?
I'm just wondering if anyone else in the crowd notices that
what is this?
Jeff likes to say something, strange, and then he just keeps talking and pretends like I'm not going to remember. How many people do you think it takes to cook a turkey?
More than this person.
Now,
I can tell you that.
Now, granted,
it takes one plus me. I can tell you.
Several.
That's the minimum.
To eat a turkey, it takes a bunch of people, but to cook one, that's a one-man job. It's a one-person job. I mean,
more than one-man job with Jeff Duncan.
One person, one oven, one bird. I mean, it's a pretty simple deal.
I can't do it. So,
all right.
If you want to cook one for me sometime, I'll be happy to.
I will do it just to prove a point, but I don't even like turkey that much. I eat turkey about 3 times a year. Thanksgiving is one of them. But I'm sure they'll cook up a nice bird here.
I would assume you're something of a Thanksgiving Day orphan as well.
A little bit.
Down here by yourself for the most part, like a lot of sports writers in the world. Have to work holidays all the time. It's part of the gig. We're not digging ditches. We have great jobs. But that is one of the setbacks is that you have to work on your the major holidays. Sometimes some people understand that, some people don't, but it's a part of the gig. And we'll look forward to that. But I think it's going to be an electric atmosphere in the Dome. I think a lot of Saints fans will be in prime form for the Falcons, the way they're playing right now. But before we get to that, let's do a little bit of review from yesterday. We talked a little bit about it. The Saints now lost Dez Bryant to that Achilles tendon injury. We asked Sean Payton yesterday after the game about how he sees their receiving core, and we now know they've signed Brandon Marshall, a veteran receiver, a guy that maybe at the end of his career, how do you see him fitting in? Do you think he's going to be thrust right into the rotation? I'm kind of curious. I have no idea what Brandon Marshall's got left. The fact that he was in Seattle starting early in the season and then immediately tumbled down the depth chart, and I think he played his last game. He only played 2 snaps or something and then got cut. That's not a good sign to me.
Yeah, so it's strange to me that there was so much more uproar for the Saints signing Dez Bryant because Brandon Marshall has had a significantly better career.
It's not even close.
Bryant. Not even close. I mean, Brandon Marshall has been one of the premier wide receivers since he entered the league. I looked this up last week. I'm going to confirm it now. I think he had like 8 out of 9 seasons in a row with at least 1,000 yards.
Correct.
I mean, he's probably one of the 25 greatest wide receivers of all time. I would have to go down the list, but I mean, I would imagine he'll
be up for consideration for the Hall of Fame. His numbers are really relevant.
But obviously, for whatever reason, people are a lot more enamored with Dez Bryant. And I think it's probably just because he's a little bit of a diva, and people can either sort of say that they like that attitude or that they hate it. And when you're a polarizing figure, I think that obviously goes a long way toward how much people are discussing you. But I mean, Brandon Marshall used to be a polarizing figure before everyone figured out that he actually has these mental health issues, and he's actually been a big proponent for supporting mental health awareness over the past handful of years. But regardless, I think it'll probably be similar to the Dez Bryant situation of they're going to just ease him in. I would be surprised if he plays on Sunday against the Eagles. I think Sean Payton said right after the game that Keith Kirkwood would be active again Sunday, and I was a little surprised by that. I mean, I can't imagine they've started the game plan at all yet for that, unless they were so confident that they would dominate the Bengals, which I suppose is a possibility based on what we saw on Sunday. But I think the Dez Bryant thing was probably more of if we can get something out of this guy for the stretch run, we might as well try it. And I think that's probably the case with Brandon Marshall, because they could still get Tommy Lee Lewis back. They could still get Ted Ginn back. I mean, they don't really need another receiver. We said this last week about Dez Bryant when that was a possibility. But, I mean, if there's any way.
He was a significantly more productive prospect for them than Brandon Marshall. And I I tend to agree with that. Just look at Brandon Marshall's numbers. But I don't think it's going to be that big a role for Brandon Marshall. I think he's probably going to play 15, 20 snaps a game and fill in, right?
I think it's going to come down to, once he learns the offense, it'll probably just come down to Brandon Marshall versus Austin Carr. Obviously, they're very different players, but I think, we've seen through the years that Sean Payton, uses wide receivers and in the different roles interchangeably. So I think they wanted a guy with some size, which isn't necessarily the MO for the Saints offense. I mean, you think about the guys that have had success, like a Lance Moore or someone like that. And they already had Mike Thomas. Traquan Smith, I think, is like 6'3". Keith Kirkwood's 6'3". That they liked about him. Obviously, that was the same for Des Bryant. But certainly, I think, Brandon Marshall can contribute anything. I think he'll just slide into that role.
Well, I'll tell you,
Same for me.
And I don't get rattled flying because I've done it so much. It doesn't clutching for the seats and seat belts, but 61%. The Saints have scored on 61% of their 93 offensive possessions this season. I don't know if people understand how incredible that is. That is one of the most remarkable numbers that I think we're going to see in the NFL in the last decade or two. It's the highest percentage of anybody in the last 15 years. It might just to put that in perspective, when the Saints set the NFL record, Darren Sproles, all those great offensive players, and they were just blowing everybody out. That great offense as well scored on 42% of its drives. And the Saints right now are scoring on 61% of their offensive drives. No one's even close to them in the NFL. A good number for a team is the 40s to score about close to half of your drives. And to make it even more impressive, doing the numbers crunching in the last 7 games, they've scored on 47 of their 71 drives in their last 7 games. But of those 71 drives, 8 of them were series like we saw yesterday at the end of the game where the Saints are just running the clock out. Mm-hmm. That counts as a drive. They've had 8 of those drives in these 7 games where they weren't even really trying to score. They were either running out the clock in victory formation or right before halftime getting the ball back with 10 seconds, and that counts as a possession. So if you eliminate those, I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers out here, they've had 63 drives in the last 7 games. They've scored 47 times.
That's wild.
It's 70-something percent. We've never seen any team in the history of the NFL scoring with this kind of efficiency, moving the ball. And I think the thing that Drew Brees talked about yesterday when we were in the locker room with him, the other added benefit of that, first of all, it wears out the other team's defense because they're on the field the whole time. But it also keeps the Saints' defense off the field, which we all know is kind of vulnerable. And I think this is somewhat strategic by Sean Payton and Drew Brees. I know it probably plays in the way their personnel is. They don't have a deep threat, quick strike guy. But I also think they know, hey, our back end of our secondary is pretty vulnerable. The best thing we could do is keep them off the field and maybe, eat this clock up. A 75-yard drive, 15 plays, get 8 yards a chunk, and, not expose our defense.
I'm just smiling at my guy Rod because he doesn't want to hear anything bad about the Saints defense. He's been saying all year how great they are, and I mean, look, they've certainly fixed things since those first. I guess week 1, week 2, there were a few bad plays, against the Browns, but they ended up clamping down for the most part. But this guy who works for Roto World, Rich Hribar, I apologize if I didn't say that correctly.
Nice effort there.
He compared the Saints in NFL history. So the Saints have scored 66% of their possessions this year. 2007 Patriots, that team, with Randy Moss had the receiving touchdowns record, 57% of their drives. The 2017 Falcons, who I'm sure a lot of people don't realize how effective that offense was, 55.8% of their drives. And then the 2013 Broncos, which is the team that broke all of those Saints 2011 offensive records, 51.1%. So, I mean, what the Saints are doing is incredible. And you wrote earlier this year that the Saints' best defense is their offense. And I think that certainly proves true because they know that if they can, control the ball, control the clock, that it makes things a lot easier for their defense because they just want those guys as well rested as possible. And certainly you have to give them some credit. They have not been getting beat deep the past couple games, as much as they were early in the season. So that is definitely something, but I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they're not playing as many snaps and they're not on the field for nearly as long. And a lot of that has to do with the Saints' offense being so effective and the run game being so effective. I mean, they have not had the volume with the run game as much as they did last year, but in terms of efficiency, it has been really good. Specific to what they need against each opponent. I think it's going to stick with me all year that Sean Payton said after the Ravens game that in some games, 3.5 yards per carry is a victory. So I think the Saints know that they don't need to be getting 6 yards a carry, but in some of these games they have been.
Yeah, and one of the byproducts of having that great offense is the punter doesn't get a lot of work. Thomas Morstead did not even punt once in the game yesterday. That's the second time in the last 5 games that he's not punted. And we were kidding him at the locker after the game yesterday because I asked him if he even needed to take a shower because all he did was go out and hold on extra points. And, of course, he snarkily said, yeah, I keep myself, worked up the whole time in case he scoffed at my question, but I was kidding him. But he's only punted 19 times this whole year, which puts the Saints on a pace to break another record. The 1999 Houston Oilers only punted 34 times in the season. I think that was probably Warren Moon and that great offense they had back then. But that would be an incredible record, the fewest amount of punts. That's because they're scoring every time. They don't need Morstead on the field. And then the other number that I think is really significant is Drew Brees and what he's doing at quarterback. He leads the league in completion percentage, 77.3. No one's close to that. That's well ahead of his pace that he set last year at 71%, an NFL record. He's got a 21-1 touchdown to interception ratio. That's insane. No one ever has been at that level at this late in the season. And that gives him a passer efficiency rating of 123.1, which also is on pace to be the greatest in the history of the NFL. Aaron Rodgers in 2011 had a 122.5. He won the Most Valuable Player award that year, and that's widely considered to be the greatest season by an NFL quarterback in the history of the NFL. Drew Brees right now is ahead of pace for all those numbers, and he's doing it at age 39 in his 18th season. That's incredible.
It is, and I know everyone here rightfully thinks that he should be the MVP, and I'm so curious how the vote is going to go because if he and Patrick Mahomes continue to do what they do, it's probably just going to be a question of efficiency versus volume. And that's not to say Patrick Mahomes hasn't been efficient. I mean, his passer rating
he's got a huge
117.4. I mean, that's not very far behind Brees. He's got 31 touchdowns. So, I mean, he's going to have like 50 touchdowns by the end of the season if he keeps this up. He has significantly more interceptions, but, I mean, his interception rate is still really low because, he's just been passing so much and scoring so much. I mean, he's going to definitely have 5,000 yards, it looks like. So, I imagine voters are sympathetic to the idea that Drew Brees hasn't won an MVP. I think Kobe Bryant won one year, when he didn't necessarily deserve it because, people think that is something that, is maybe sort of a lifetime achievement thing, once you've reached a certain point.
Yeah, it's like an Academy Award.
Exactly.
Sometimes they give it to you late in your career.
Now, Drew, that would not be the case. I mean, he certainly. I mean, it's a 2-man race right now. I mean, I could see Todd Gurley getting back into it, but I think voters really do understand that the quarterbacks are what drive the league right now, and those are the 2 best players probably in the league this season. So one of them will have to find a way to pull ahead. But right now, I think Brees should be in the lead.
Just to kind of further illustrate what you were talking about with Mahomes and Brees, the greatest passer rating seasons in NFL history right now, and again, we're halfway through the year, so these numbers are going to come down. The more snaps, the more times they're on the field. But right now, Drew Brees has the greatest season ever He's number 1 with a 123.8. Mahomes would be number 5. Phillip Rivers would be number 8. And then you got Matt Ryan and Jared Goff, 11 and 12 with ratings of 113. So I guess what I'm trying to point out here is people are passing better than ever. The efficiency ratings, quarterbacks are throwing fewer interceptions, they're getting sacked fewer. Obviously, the rules are all tailored for the offense, for the receivers to get open. They're penalizing DBs for holding more often. And what we're seeing is passing at a higher level than we've ever seen in the history of the NFL. And I think it's only going to continue to go that way. I think the NFL loves it, right? They love high-scoring games like this, great quarterback play. They want to keep the quarterbacks healthy. That's the other thing I think that's pointed out here with the protection of the quarterbacks. These guys are on the field. So we get on the Saints DBs a lot of times. I know I do, but I think it's around the league. It's just very difficult to stop quarterbacks at this level.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Rams and Vikings, I keep coming back to that game. Those are supposed to be two of the best defenses in the NFL, and that was a total shootout. Then the Rams come to New Orleans, and it's a shootout again. Now, obviously, Marcus Peters has not been playing the way that the Rams expected him. Ndamukong Suh is not having the impact, that he used to early in his career. But, I mean, this is just an offensive league. That's the way it goes. I mean, these things come in waves. And, it seemed like defense had a little bit of a rebound last year, after the passing craze took over. But now that they changed the rules again, with, all the things you can do to the quarterback and, lowering your helmet and all that, we're seeing another offensive explosion. And the NFL certainly loves it. I mean, this is a league that is now driven by fantasy football because that's pretty much all a lot of people care about. And so, the more points and the more excitement offensively, I mean, that's just going to keep people in the seats.
I got a question here, actually, emailed to me from someone watching on Facebook. I don't know why they didn't just put it on Facebook, but Robert Lee asks, and you can answer this bit maybe better than I can. He wants to know why Thomas Morstead has never had a punt blocked. He says he only takes 2 steps, wants to know if that is the reason, because a lot of punters take 3 steps. I don't know the answer to that. I've never asked Morstead that. I know he's never had one blocked, though. I do know that.
I actually don't know that. I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know. I would think that that's an oddity, but, has Johnny Hecker ever had one blocked? I mean, I'd be curious to know, how many of the top punters, have gone through their career without being blocked. Because, I mean, punt blocks are rare plays. So I think that has to do with part of it, but certainly I would imagine that Morstead deserves the most credit for how quickly he gets the ball off. And then I think, the Saints special teams punt unit would obviously get a lot of credit for that too. So, I mean, that's really impressive. I did not realize that, but again, I don't know how unique it is.
Well, yeah, he never punts, as they said, so he doesn't get it blocked. But look, as we left this morning, news was breaking in Cincinnati. I don't think this is a shock to anybody, but Terrell Austin was fired as defense coordinator. That was the 3rd game in a row that the Bengals had allowed over 500 yards. So while we are here praising the Saints offense, they were moving against a defense that is on pace to set an NFL record for the most yards allowed in a season in the history of the NFL, which, by the way, ignominiously is owned by the 2012 New Orleans Saints. So I'm sure that Sean Payton is going to want the Cincinnati Bengals to break that record because that's one record you don't want to have. But did that surprise you, Terrell Austin getting axed? Because there was a few years ago where a lot of people thought he might be an NFL head coach candidate. I think he interviewed for a bunch of jobs, and now he's out of work.
No, it didn't surprise me that he got fired. I mean, you can't go through a stretch like that, especially with a team that is supposed to be carried by its defense. I mean, Andy Dalton, is not one of the best quarterbacks in the league, but in terms of the starters, he's average. I mean, he's probably a lot like Alex Smith. Now, they play a little bit differently. Andy Dalton can air out a little bit more, but in terms of the way they lead the offense, and you really need, when you have a quarterback that's average, you can win games when you have a good defense, and that was just not the case. I mean, and the Bengals, in theory, have the defensive personnel to be good.
I agree.
They were good early in the year, but yeah, the past 3 games they've been a train wreck, and certainly it has something to do with, one of those games was against the Chiefs, and I think a few weeks before that it was against the Falcons in Atlanta and the Steelers. So, I mean, you certainly have to consider the opponents. And I actually know Terrell Austin. I covered him in Detroit when he was the defensive coordinator, and he came in. I believe his first year, The Lions went to the playoffs, and it was a lot because of the defense. He found a way to unlock Ndamukong Suh and Nick Fairley and some of the other guys that they had that really hadn't been producing. So I do think he's a good coach, but yeah, I mean, it's been sort of a precipitous fall for him because he interviewed 2 years in a row for a bunch of head coaching jobs. Now, I think part of that, might have been, due to the Rooney Rule, which is unfortunate to say. But when he doesn't get one of the jobs, and when a lot of people thought he was deserving, I think that's certainly something that you have to consider, even if that's not the way it's supposed to be. But yeah, I mean, it's always tough to see. And now, I don't know if you saw this too. I saw Mike Silver say that Hugh Jackson's open to joining the Bengals. So I mean, that could be a fun storyline for the people out in Cincinnati.
Going back home, right? I mean, that's where he coached with Marvin Lewis
Yep.
for a number of years. That certainly would make a lot of sense to me. Thank you, Jim. We got a couple questions from the crowd here. The first one, of course, our most popular question every week is about James Carville, our good friend. My BFF. I saw James on Friday, actually, in New Orleans. And he was still claiming lots of conspiracy theories about the Alabama Crimson Tide's cozy relationship with the SEC office. And we got another question about that. Is there any credibility to Carville's claim of the Alabama empire after the dubious calls being identified by Mississippi State non-calls? And there was a lot of talk about that. I think Alabama had one penalty or no penalties in the game. I think no penalties, right? First Power 5 team, I think, of the season in a Power 5 conference to not have a penalty in a game. Yes, obviously there's a lot of credence right now for the James Carville conspiracy theorists. I don't believe it at all. I'm sorry. I'm not going the way. I think Alabama's just really, really good, and I don't think anybody's going to beat them as long as Tua Tagovailoa is healthy. But James Carville, I'm sure, is having a great time with that. There's like all kinds of memes and GIFs showing up on the internet about it. He did tell me, that shirt he wore on ESPN that had the Cajun saying to the SEC. He told me that they were taking that and going to have it raffled off for charity, and the money was going to go to a good cause. So he had turned it into a very positive thing, even though the SEC didn't think kindly of it.
I imagine their shirts will be reprinted, and a bunch of people will be buying those. We'll be seeing them at LSU games in the future.
His point was, if you're going to do something like that, be creative and smart. He was referencing the talking out the side of your neck stuff that goes on at LSU, and he says that's sophomoric. If you know Carville, he's one thing he is smart. Second thing he is creative. He's a very creative guy. So I thought it was appropriate the way he handled the SEC office.
Well, I don't know him like you do because I know you like to humble brag and all this stuff and the name drops. This is just a common occurrence.
Not conceited, just convinced.
Jeff, if you say so. There's certainly credence to the idea that the SEC, is pulling strings. But and I love a good conspiracy theory. However, I mean, just basic logic would suggest that the SEC has no benefit to having Alabama be a successful team. I mean, both.
Well, yeah. Why would you say that?
I mean, I think sports makes more money when there's parity. So when Alabama wins year after year, they're only getting the national championship game is only getting the Alabama money and all that stuff. When it's a team like Georgia, a lot more people are going out because it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. When it's whatever random team that you could think of. I mean, if Tennessee one year was really good in the national championship, every person who has any tie to Tennessee would be spending all the money to go to the bowl games, to travel, to go party, to buy all this gear. I mean, I just don't see how the SEC benefits more from having Alabama continually win as opposed to other teams.
Well, as I brought up, I mentioned this last week on the pod. When Nick Saban was at LSU, Alabama, the SEC office was still in Birmingham, and Alabama's officials were still going to the same country club, eating at the same restaurants, and LSU was winning all the games. They still had that cozy relationship. It didn't matter on the field. So that's my counter to the James Carville conspiracy. Okay. All right. Jim McPhail has a good question. I like this one, Jim. He wants to know how the offense and defenses compare with this team and the 2009 Super Bowl team. I'll answer that first and then get Josh's input on that. I think this offense is actually better than that offense. I think it's different, though, and I think Drew Brees would tell you the same thing. We were mentioning this earlier. They're not as explosive. They don't have Devery Henderson and Robert Meacham, these quick strike guys. Reggie Bush was a dynamic playmaker, but they're much more efficient. We mentioned the scoring percentages. They've never had a team like this that can score the way they're scoring right now. Drew Brees, it's a shock when he throws an incompletion. He had 3 incompletions yesterday in the whole game. One of them, Taysom Hill, dropped. I can't drop a pass. I didn't know he could do anything wrong.
That's the second pass he's dropped.
All right.
This year.
Clearly, Drew didn't throw it properly. And then the second thing he did was threw one into the dirt, I think, because the play was snuffed out by the Bengals defense. He threw as many touchdown passes as he did incompletions. It's amazing the efficiency he's playing with. And the offensive line, I think, actually, this offensive line is better than that line. I think this is the best line they've ever had. There's no weak link in the line, and that's why this team is so good. I mean, they're dominating people up front. They did it again yesterday. They run the ball. They get a bad play for them is like 4 yards. That's a bad play.
Yeah.
And Drew talked about that. He said, we can't get bored with a short completion. We can't get bored with a 4-yard gain because it is easy to get kind of take that for granted, and they can't take it for granted, and this team hasn't so far.
So I agree for the most part. Obviously, this is an incredible offensive line. I mean, they're moving guys off the ball. And Max Unger said after the game that this is the toughest stretch of defensive linemen he's ever faced in his career. And, I mean, you just go down the line. I mean, it started, I would probably say, with Washington. I mean, they've got sort of an underrated interior, presence. And then they have Ryan Kerrigan on the edge. And then who did they play immediately after the bye? I'm blanking on it.
Well, they played
Baltimore.
Baltimore, Minnesota.
Who had 11 sacks the week before against Tennessee, and then they go to Minnesota, and they stopped that line, and then Minnesota the following week had 10 sacks in their game against the Lions. The Rams with Aaron Donald and Ndamukong Suh, Michael Brockers. They just added Dante Fowler, and then this week with Cincinnati, who has why am I blanking on Geno Atkins. Another one of the top interior guys, and Carlos Dunlap, who has been really good the past few years. So, I mean, what they've been doing is incredible because not only are they just like holding their own, they are pushing these guys significantly on so many plays. They're giving Drew Brees plenty of time. They're creating plenty of lanes for the running backs. But the thing that I disagree with you on is...
I can't believe you disagree with me. I'm stunned.
So, I agree with the idea that those other teams were more explosive, and I think that's because they had a little bit more speed. But I think what really sets this offense apart is that Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara are better offensive skill position players than anyone on those 2009 and 2011 teams.
I agree with that.
The difference is, though, that Michael Thomas isn't going to beat you deep for an 80-yard touchdown. I mean, he did it the one time against the Rams, but that's not his game. And part of the reason the Saints are so efficient is that Michael Thomas will consistently catch 5, 15, or 10-yard catches a game. And those add up over time. And, I mean, those are demoralizing to the defense when, it's third down. If it's 3rd and 4 and you just throw a slant to Michael Thomas that gains 10 yards, if that happens 2 or 3 times a game, I mean, all of a sudden the defense is like, how do we stop this guy? And really, you can't. Same with Alvin Kamara. I mean, he will gain 6 yards on first down and then 4 yards on second down. And then all of a sudden the chain's moving. And both those guys are just so unstoppable. And so even if they don't have the huge explosive plays that they did in 09 and 11, all these little ones add up.
Do you think Alvin Kamara is better than Reggie Bush?
Yes, absolutely.
I do
Absolutely.
too.
Not even close.
I do too. A better all-around player.
Yeah, absolutely.
He may not be quite as crazy explosive just speed-wise, but I think all around he's a better player.
Right. No, the explosiveness was always Reggie Bush's best trait, but the problem is that you can't just go full speed all the time. And Alvin Kamara has a really amazing grasp of when to change speeds, whether it's speed up or slow down. And it never really looks like he's going 110%. He never really seems to be at top speed because he always sort of wants to give himself that chance to, drop it a gear and then just zoom away. That touchdown against the Rams, last week at the beginning of the game, the 11-yard touchdown on the left side. It was Kamara and Teron Armstead 2-on-3 against the Rams defense, and you had to assume Armstead would block one of those guys. And Kamara just made the other 2 guys miss because
that was incredible.
He slowed down and made them think that he was cutting it back, and then all of a sudden he just zoomed right back to the edge, and I mean it was unstoppable. And I mean Reggie Bush certainly, came in with higher expectations, and I think that sort of shapes the way people judge his career. I mean, he was a productive player for a long time in the NFL, but Alvin Kamara last year was better than any season Reggie Bush ever had, and this year he's on pace to do it again. And I think that it's just because he's a better player.
Yeah, and I think Sproles was actually better than Reggie Bush, but what do I know? All right, another question, which I think is another great question. We get really incredible question. Beside the one I just skipping over here about the sports book getting to the officials, we're really getting into the bizarre conspiracy theories here now in the Balcony Sports Lounge tonight. Who goes to the Super Bowl besides the Saints? That's a good question. I actually think the Saints are going to go to the Super Bowl. I didn't think that 2-3 weeks ago. The way they're playing right now, as long as they stay healthy, I think they're the best team in the NFC. I think they'll beat the Rams, even if they have to play them in Los Angeles. If they get them in the Superdome, I don't think anybody's going to beat this team in the Superdome. I will say this. I think it's the two best teams in the AFC are the Chiefs and the Steelers. And I think the Steelers actually are the team to fear if you're Kansas City, not New England, because the Steelers appear to be getting right on defense. They've got some playmakers over there. They might have the best defense of the top teams in the AFC, and we know they can score.
So earlier when I cut you off to bring up Alarmgate or Smashgate, whatever you want to call it, you brought up the fact that we said we're not going to pick against the Saints until they lose. At this moment, I would certainly expect them to go 15-1 and make it to the Super Bowl. I just don't see how they could dominate a team like the Bengals on the road, beat a team like the Vikings on the road, pretty much dominate the Rams. I mean, the score was close, and the Rams made a comeback, but I would say for 3 out of the 4 quarters, they were a clearly superior team. And I just don't know how anyone is going to beat this team. I mean, you could argue that, the Panthers or the Falcons, just because they're so familiar, might be able to unlock something. But right now, I just don't think this is a team that you can beat. And I don't expect them to experience any emotional pitfalls. I don't see them falling into the trap game that everyone talks about. People talked about this Bengals game being a trap game. How'd that work out?
Yeah, I knew that wasn't going to be the case.
It was a trap for one team.
I think Carolina at Carolina is a definite game they could lose. And I think they could lose to Pittsburgh at home. Because I think Pittsburgh is playing very well. They've got defensive players, and they can score with the Saints. You got to be able to score with them. You can't be this pop gun offense like Cincinnati. You saw what happened with them. They have like 4th and 1. They were going to go for it in their midfield. Guy jumps off sides. They have to punt, and the game was like over when they did not score again. So I think Pittsburgh is a danger, but I think the worst case scenario is the Saints finish 13-3, and I don't think they will. I think they'll be 14-2 or something. That's going to be good enough to get them the other bye in the first round. They'll get a home game in the Superdome. No one's going to beat them in the Superdome, and then they either have to go to LA or they host LA. One of those two, I think. And that's I think the worst case scenario is going to the NFC Championship game.
I agree. And I could see, whether it's the Rams or, if they face the Panthers a third time, those games. I don't think the facing a team a third time, can you beat a team 3 times? Someone disproved those stats a while back. But still, I mean, that would be a really tough opponent. I mean, we saw last year in the playoffs, the Panthers could have won that game. I mean, the Saints were ahead for most of it, but late there, there was a chance that the Panthers could have made that comeback. But I got to call you out, as I always do. I was talking about the Steelers at dinner last night. I was the one who brought up the Steelers as the team in the AFC that no one's talking about.
I can't acknowledge that myself.
Nope, you made this up. You came to this conclusion after talking to me. But I do think that, certainly it's the Chiefs and the Steelers. I think we've been saying all year that the Patriots are probably not as good as they typically are. Now, Bill Belichick might find a way to, get things back on track. But right now, I would say the Chiefs and the Steelers on the other side, and then probably the Saints and the Rams.
I believe I told Carolyn Fox that they were going to be down this year, and she was very upset. And once again, right. Let's switch gears. Let's go to the college football action. We want to talk a little bit about how things are shaping up on the national scene. Also, I mean, it wasn't a huge weekend for local teams. I mean, LSU goes to Arkansas, wins 24-17. It's kind of a boring game. I saw a little of the highlights of that. But the big thing that came out of that game, of course, was Nick Brissett taking a slide late in the game. I don't know why people – it's all the bettors that's raising the stink over this because he slid and didn't go in the end zone. That's not the first.
Yep.
That's not
We got a guy who says it is.
But that's not the first time that's happened. I mean, that's happened a number of times. It's the smart play, right? If he scores there, Arkansas gets the ball and has a chance to onside kick if they theoretically score again.
How much time was left?
A few seconds left. I understand, Jerry. There's a few seconds left. Yes, needed the score to get the number. But Nick Brissett obviously is not thinking that way. He's trying to win the football game for his team. I've seen that happen a number of times over the years by players. I think it just happened in the NFL not too long ago. Somebody, Todd Gurley did the exact same thing. I don't know if that affected the number though, like Jerry's saying. So, but nevertheless, 24-17, LSU wins. They kind of take care of business. They get Rice this week. They're 44-point favorites. I mean, really, do we even have to talk about this game? They're going to blow out Rice, and then they're going to go on the road to College Station, one of the great environments in all of college football, to play the Texas A&M Aggies. That, to me, is the make or break game for this whole season. How this season for LSU will be defined by that game. If they win, they're probably going to go to the Sugar Bowl or a New Year's Day 6 Bowl. If they lose, they'll be probably in a lower tier bowl like the Citrus Bowl or the Outback Bowl. But still, I think even if they lose to A&M, they go 9-3. It's still better than I think most people thought they would be. Certainly better than I thought they would be. I picked them 7-5, so I didn't know what I was talking about. Overall,
as usual,
overall, I think LSU has to feel good about where they're at. They have a chance to get double-digit wins on the season, and their only losses to Alabama, who's the best team, and they have the entire SEC office in their back pocket, as we've all come to a consortium here to agree on. And they lost at Florida in a very difficult game in the fourth quarter. So LSU can still theoretically sneak into the college football playoff. And I don't think it's crazy to think that they could get in there. What are they, 7th right now? They need a lot of things to happen. They need Georgia to lose to Alabama in the SEC championship game, which I think will happen. I think we all agree on that. They need Michigan to lose at Ohio State. That's very possible. We know that rivalry is always – I know Ohio State's down. It could happen. And then I think they need one other thing to happen is Oklahoma has to lose at West Virginia, which is also possible with Will Grier. They could sneak in. It's not out of the realm of possibility that LSU could be that 4th team.
They could sneak in, but, I mean, they would have to have a lot go right. I mean, but even if they don't, I mean, they should be playing on a New Year's Day bowl, so long.
They got to win. They got to beat A&M.
They need to win out, and then they need Georgia to not, keep it so close or beat Alabama so that, 2 other SEC teams don't make it, into the playoff. But either way, I mean, I think LSU is in a good position. But I do think we need to talk about Tulane.
Well, yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. One quick thing though about the SEC, I think even if Georgia plays Alabama close, if they just lose that game, I think you have to take LSU over Georgia because they drubbed them head to head.
For sure.
And both teams would have 2 losses. If I'm LSU and we have the same record, we both have 2 losses, and I beat the snot out of Georgia, that's a better argument. So I think they've got a great shot to edge out Georgia for the second place team, which would go to the Sugar Bowl. They have to take the highest ranked team.
But it's all about recency bias. It's such a problem with a lot of these voters that, they might see, Georgia, looked pretty good against Alabama. And LSU didn't. Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good point. We'll see how the voters determine that going forward. You mentioned Tulane. They were not incredibly impressive. They did beat East Carolina, who had not won a game all year. But the point is, Tulane has now got 5 wins. They're going to Houston, and this is crazy, but if they were to beat Houston, they will win or put themselves in position to win the Western Conference, the Western Division of the American Athletic Conference. That's insane to me.
Yeah.
They were on the edge of completely imploding just a few weeks ago. They elevate Justin McMillan to be their starting quarterback. That was the right call. He's led them to 3 straight wins, and now they have a chance. That's going to be a very tall task for them to beat Houston in Houston. Houston's got a really good team. But just the fact that they're relevant again, and even if they lose that game, they come back home to Yulman Stadium in the last game of the year. They'd be 5-6 at that point, and they would have a chance to play a Navy team that's only got 2 wins. They beat Navy. They become bowl eligible, and I think it would be the first time they would be bowl eligible since 2000. 2011, I think it is, when Curtis Johnson was there. They've only been once in the last like 20 years or something like that to a bowl game. Certainly once in the last decade. First time in 7 years that they would go have a chance to go to a bowl game. So I think again that's another accomplishment for Willie Fritz in his third year, taking another step if they can get to that point.
Absolutely. And look, it was not an impressive victory, but I mean the numbers are certainly pretty good. I mean Tulane put up over 500 yards of total offense. Justin McMillan had one of the wackiest stat lines I've ever seen. I'm looking at it right now: 12 for 28, 372 yards and 3 touchdowns. I mean that's what happens when you have long touchdowns. I mean it looks like he threw an 86-yard touchdown and a 73-yard touchdown, but still, I mean this team is certainly exceeding expectations by a long shot. And, I wouldn't be surprised if they beat Houston this week. I mean, it seems like, they are dead set on getting to the bowl that they missed out on last year. And, I mean, they're knocking on the door.
Well, that's what happens when you have a triple option type of offense that Willie Fritz runs. You run it, and then you drop back and you hit a long pass. And that's what they do. We've seen Georgia Tech do that a number of years with Paul Johnson. That's the Willie Fritz system as well. And that's what Justin McMillan can do. He's got a big-time arm. And if you talk to the people at LSU, when he was at LSU, a lot of people felt like he was actually dead even with Miles Brennan as the backup with behind Joe Burrow, that it was Miles Brennan and Justin McMillan. So he saw the logjam there. He wanted to play, gets a chance to lead a team to a bowl, and then he can come back next year and have his senior season. So it looks like this is going to work out for him. It's worked out for Tulane, and I'm sure it's worked out for LSU. He said, I talked to him last week. He said he still talks to all the players on the LSU team. He still roots for them. He said he was nervous getting on the team bus after they beat South Florida. He had the Alabama LSU game on his phone and was like nervous for LSU. Didn't pan out quite for him.
Could have been nervous for too long.
Yeah, he wasn't nervous until about halftime. But the point is like this is a case of like some people get upset when players transfer. I totally understand it. He wanted to go and play. He was a junior. He graduated, got his degree, and that's what I think that system that the NCAA is set up for players to get their degrees and have a chance to go play somewhere. I think makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. And you have to give him credit for, picking the right spot. I mean, a lot of these guys transfer and, they end up hating their situation just because, most guys, the first college they pick, there's a reason they went there. And then, to fall into a backup situation. And, I mean, I'm sure he wasn't thrilled that he, it took this long for him to get in. But, I mean, now he's here, and it looks like, there's a good chance he'll be starting in a bowl game.
All right, we're going to go back to the Saints real quick before we wrap up here. We had a question from Paul Flood, who stopped by. It's good to see Paul here tonight. And wants to know if we have an update on Armstead. Usually those things, after a game like this, you don't get a really early update until middle of the week, right? I mean, I bet he probably had an MRI done today or when he got back on his shoulder, right? So it's a shoulder injury. Is that what they're calling it?
That's what they said in the game. I think it depends, on the situation. I mean, there are some times where you do find out on Monday if it's like a season-ending injury, because a lot of times the teams will want to make that transaction and get a new guy in and put the guy on IR. Now, I imagine the Saints are going to take as much time as possible to figure out exactly what he's dealing with because they want him back and healthy. And now, all of this I'm saying is total speculation because I have no idea how serious his injury is. All we know is that he left the game in the second quarter, didn't return, and after the game, he was still in the examination room. Now, that doesn't mean that he was still undergoing more tests, but, I think, Sean Payton didn't give us an update. We'll probably find out a little bit more on Wednesday, just if, he practices or not. I wouldn't expect him to. But, at least we'll know for sure if it's a shoulder injury because they'll have to list something. And then hopefully, Sean Payton will clue us in a little bit more.
I would say this, of the years I've covered the NFL, which is a lot because I'm old, not as old as you, but nevertheless, we've all seen these injuries, right? That didn't look good. The fact that he had his pads off, that he left the game, he didn't come back, that he was still getting examined, we don't know what it is, but it indicates a level of severity. I think.
Well, he tossed his helmet to the bench.
Right.
And so these guys know their body, and especially a guy like Teron Armstead, who's been hurt a lot throughout his career. I mean, he's never played all 16 games. So I think he probably knew that this was something, I don't want to say serious. I mean, because all injuries you could argue are serious, but I mean, I think he definitely knew that the way things happened, it certainly looked like he'll miss some time. But again, totally speculation.
Yeah, I agree. We don't want to speculate on it. We'll know more by Wednesday, Paul, but didn't look good. But I would say this: Jermon Bushrod played well in Armstead's absence. He's a guy that I'm surprised could still be playing left tackle in the NFL, but they have options there. If Bushrod does not show that he can play left tackle, they could always move Pete out there at left tackle, or they could flip Ryan Ramczyk over to left tackle and put Bushrod at right tackle. So they've got some flexibility, some versatility there if Armstead's out for a while, but that is a significant loss because Armstead, like as we said, was playing at like an all-pro or Pro Bowl level this season. I want to remind everybody again about not this Thursday, a week from Thursday, Thanksgiving Day. Here at the Balcony Sports Lounge, we'll have the Saints-Falcons game on. You can get up here at 6 o'clock. But before that, 200 North Beach, restaurant downstairs, great food, Chef Keith Becton, incredible menu, great fish in particular. I love the oysters downstairs, and the blackened redfish is probably my favorite dish. That will be open from 11 to 5 on Thanksgiving Day. So if you're out over here in Bay St. Louis, come on over, enjoy a great Thanksgiving dinner here, then come upstairs and watch the Saints-Falcons games. And if you're interested in Thanksgiving Day catering menu, you can call here to the restaurant. They can explain that to you, or you can visit 200northbeach.com as well and find out about the catering for that. And Avery will be upstairs here serving. I assume he's going to be up here on Thanksgiving Day. I'm not sure if he will or not, but I'm hoping he will. Oh, wait, I got one more question here. How did I overlook this question? I guess I'm just so caught up in everything. Asked if we like the new additions here of Brandon Marshall. So before we sign off, let's answer that. Brandon Marshall, we talked a little bit about earlier. I like the guy, like just the person, the things I've seen with him with his mental health. I like Brandon Marshall. I just don't know what he's got left. Like I'm always leery when you bring in these big name guys that have been kicked around the league for 2 or 3 teams. Now the thing is with the Saints, he's going to have a very specific, determined role. Sean will have a vision for him, as he says. And he might produce. He might be able to help them in a very limited role, whereas Seattle, they don't have quite the dynamic offense with all the playmakers the Saints do. But I'm always leery to people get a big name coming in and they think he's going to be a big star. I think this guy's going to play 15 snaps a game.
Yeah, I mean, he's 34 years old, and like we said earlier, he was cut by a Seahawks team that does not have very good wide receiver depth. So the fact that they were willing to let him walk, sort of shows you that he's on his last legs. However, he's going to come in here motivated because in his 13 NFL seasons, he's never made the playoffs. So he's going to want to do anything that he can to help this team, not only make the playoffs, but certainly get to a Super Bowl. Now, whether that just means he's offering, his leader, replacing Austin Carr in the lineup, who has not been very productive, I don't know. I mean, I would be surprised if we see him in the game this week. I think they'll stick with their, wide receiver rotation with Keith Kirkwood, who made a couple nice plays in that game, one really nice tackle on special teams, and then the 42-yard reception. So, I think time will tell with Brandon Marshall, but it's really no risk for the Saints. Just as I said with Des Bryant, I mean, everyone wants to talk about his attitude and everything, but I think we saw on Sunday, when everyone was throwing up the X for Des, when they're scoring touchdowns, even the defensive guys did it after Marcus Williams' interception. And then in the locker room, they all talked about how much he just came here and wanted to fit in. I think it's going to be the same case with Brandon Marshall. But I wouldn't expect him to all of a sudden look like he once did with the Dolphins or the Broncos or the Bears.
Well, there was one time I could tell you when the Saints played in Denver. It was in the early 2000s when Brandon Marshall was at his peak. The Saints went there. I remember they lost the game late. I believe there was a missed field goal. It might have been Olindo Mare or it was Martin Gramatic. I can't remember which guy missed it. The reason I remember it vividly is because the kicker skipped out and didn't answer any questions, which was a cowardly thing to do. But Brandon Marshall was the star there at that time, and he was incredible. I mean, he was one of the elite receivers in the league, and I just remember distinctly watching that game thinking, he's a lot better than Marcus Colston. As much as I like Colston you could just see the dynamic athleticism of Brandon Marshall. But that was a long time ago. That was over a decade ago. Last year in New York, Brandon Marshall started 5 games. He had 18 receptions. This year, he starts 2 games for Seattle, 11 receptions. There's a reason these guys are moving on from him. So, but that said, if he's their 3rd receiver or their 4th receiver here, and he can catch a touchdown pass every once in a while in the red zone, that's all the Saints really need him to do because they got so many other weapons around him.
Body of work, Brandon Marshall might be the best receiver Drew Brees has ever played with. Now, at this moment, that's probably not the case, but I think you could argue, Brandon Marshall versus Michael Thomas, and obviously it's only 3 seasons, but I mean, Brandon Marshall is an incredible player. I said earlier, I can't believe that, there was so much more excitement last week over Des Bryant compared to Brandon Marshall. Now, obviously, it's because of his age. People probably think he's washed up, but still, I mean, this guy used to be incredible, and I'm excited to talk to him on Wednesday.
All right, well, that's going to wrap up. Oh, Jim is just full of questions. He's such a curious sort. He's got one more before we get off here. Wants to know about, do the Raiders clear the rest of the house? And that's a good question. How are they going to handle the rest of the year, the way they've been doing it? And what do they do, going forward with the Raiders? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I don't like what's going on in Oakland. I don't think anything's good is going to come out of losing Khalil Mack, who's one of the best players in the league. I don't understand that. I know that they didn't think they could pay him, but I think you've got to have some buzz with your organization and your company when you move into a new market the way they're doing, getting ready to go to Las Vegas. Right now, they're one of the worst teams in the league. Now, maybe if they go and move Derek Carr and trade him because there's word that he doesn't get along with Gruden, maybe they get the buzz of getting a new first-round draft pick at quarterback and they just completely do a teardown. But I don't like the way their organization's going right now. You're paying the guy $10 million a year.
Never should have paid him a $100 million contract. I mean, this guy should be fired based on what he's done in one season. And frankly, but I kind of want him to, just because it'd be amazing to say that he got paid $100 million for one season. And, I mean, this Raiders team is going to needed to find a way to pay Khalil Mack. I mean, you can't say that, we can't pay him. NFL.
You can always find a way to manipulate the salary cap. We've seen that with he's doing. I think it's pretty clear. It wouldn't surprise me. I would say this, Jim. It wouldn't surprise me once they behind closed doors settle some kind of deal, and the Davis family moves on from the Raiders. I know that that's crazy because Al Davis's legacy, but the league wants that to work in Las Vegas. They've got a lot invested, and I don't know how successful it'll be with the current ownership there. You can see that that's a train wreck right now, the way they got it going. They've got a lot invested out there. Those things happen. People don't know it, but it happens at the high league level, and it wouldn't surprise me if it happened there. All right, well, let's wrap up. We've gone a little bit over here today. Our great boss over here, Jennifer Armstrong, is probably wondering why we're going over. But I want to thank everybody here for coming out. As always, we've got a great crowd as always. Out on a rainy night in Bay St. Louis and still coming out. I feel flattered that everybody came out tonight. And we'll be back here again Monday night. And I want to remind everybody about the Thanksgiving Day dinner that you're going to have here. You come out to 200 North Beach Restaurant, then come upstairs again to Bay St. Louis. We will be over in the Superdome for Saints Falcons, but they'll have it on here upstairs as well. I want to thank Mike Chauvin. I want to thank Michelle Tuggle, as always, our great crowd here. Luke Augusta, our great engineer, and of course Avery, he's getting ready to serve me a nice glass of wine. We'll be back again on Monday night here for the Dat Chat podcast. Thanks, and we're signing off.